Everything I've documented this year shared a hidden assumption, and it's expiring. The AI I've been writing about voice clones, avatar tools, prior auth engines, hiring tools was advisory. It scored, ranked, recommended. A human sat in the loop, able to override. When it failed, the failure was a bad recommendation a human acted on. Accountability had a place to live, the person who decided. That's dissolving. The systems arriving now don't recommend, they act. Gartner projects 40% of enterprise applications will embed task specific AI agents by the end of 2026, up from under 5% in 2025. An agent doesn't produce a score for you to weigh. It books, sends, approves, prices, escalates at machine speed across thousands of instances, often before any human knows a decision was made. Governance question changes the moment a system stops advising a human and starts being the human. And that change isn't incremental, it's a discontinuity. The operating model you built for advisory AI does not survive it. The frameworks I've built all year assumed a human consumes the output and bears the decision. Watch what happens to each when the system acts on its own. Detection. With an advisory tool, a human sees each recommendation, someone might notice the bias. With an autonomous agent, the actions happen at a volume no human reviews one by one, and bias accumulates across thousands of decisions before anyone sees a single one. The detection problem doesn't just persist, it intensifies, because the gap between a biased decision and its consequence collapses toward zero. Containment. An advisory system, you stop using she, people revert to their own judgment. An agent woven into a workflow, taking actions other systems depend on, can't always be paused without breaking everything downstream. An agent you can't stop isn't a tool with a problem. It's a process with no breaks. And accountability, the hinge. When a tool recommends and a recruiter decides, the recruiter is accountable. When an agent screens, schedules, and rejects with no human in the loop, who's accountable for the rejection? The vendor? The team that deployed it? The executive who approved it? In most organizations right now, it's genuinely unclear. And unclear accountability isn't a philosophical inconvenience. It's the exact condition under which harm runs unchecked, because a harm that belongs to no one is a harm no one is responsible for stopping. I've made that argument all year about the demographic question that belongs to no function. The agentic shift takes that ownership vacuum and gives it the power to act. The good news? The discipline doesn't have to be invented. It has to be relocated from after the decision, where advisory governance lived, to before and around the decision. First, relocation, from review to boundaries. You can't review an agent's decisions one at a time at machine speed. So governance moves upstream into the boundaries you set on what the agent may do autonomously and what it must escalate. The emerging practice, guardrail agents, policy as code, encodes the limits directly into the system. So high stakes, demographic sensitive, or irreversible actions are structurally blocked from autonomous execution. The question is no longer, did we review the output? It's, did we define the boundary correctly? And is it actually enforced? Second, relocation, from human in the loop to human on the loop, with the demographic question inside the loop. For the highest stakes categories, anything that hires, fires, prices, or denies care, the human stays in the loop, not monitoring from a distance. For everything else, the human is on the loop, watching patterns and exceptions. The critical addition, the generic conversation keeps omitting demographic performance, has to be one of the patterns you watch. An agent acting across thousands of demographic sensitive decisions, monitored only for cost and throughput, is an inclusion tax engine running at machine speed with no one watching the seam. Third, relocation accountability assigned before deployment. The accountability vacuum isn't a fact of nature. It's a design choice made by omission, and it can be made by commission instead. Before an agent ships, a named human owns accountability for its actions, including its demographic performance, with the authority to pause it and the obligation to monitor it. That's not novel machinery. It's the named owner discipline I've argued for all year, applied to a system that can act without waiting for the owner to look. I lived a small version of this with the Building Me Back voice clone. A voice clone is, really, an early, narrow agent. It can speak as me when I'm not there, taking an action on my behalf. Building it forced exactly these questions on a personal scale. What's it allowed to say autonomously, and what waits for me? Who's accountable for what it says? The platform or me? How would I even know if it said something in my voice I'd never say? The answers I worked out for an instrument acting on behalf of one person are the same answers organizations now need for instruments acting on behalf of thousands. The scale is different. The structure is identical. Let me be specific, because you need an AI governance function is easy to nod at and impossible to act on without detail. In an organization with no governance function, AI governance is touched by everyone and owned by no one. Legal touches it when there's a contract, security when there's a risk, IT when there's a deployment, DEI when there's a complaint, procurement when there's a purchase. Each handles the slice that falls inside its existing mandate. And the enormous space between their mandates, where demographic performance lives, where the seam lives, where the agent's accountability lives, belongs to none of them, because it was never anyone's job to own the whole. Watch what happens to the accessibility audit. It gets routed to whichever function it most resembles, usually legal or security, because they own risk. But the audit isn't really a legal or security question. It's a socio-technical one. It needs the model's behavior, the affected populations, the deployment context, and the organization's values all at once. No single existing function holds all four. So legal does the legal looking part, security does the security looking part, and the parts that look like neither, the demographic performance question, the lived experience question, the parts that actually matter, fall into the gap and stay there. Same thing happens to every framework in this series for the same reason. Cross-functional work without a cross-functional owner doesn't get done. It gets partially done by several functions, each handling its familiar fragment, with the most important fragments orphaned in between. That's not a failure of effort. It's a failure of structure. The people are willing. The box doesn't exist. The agentic shift is the biggest change in this landscape since I started this series, and it arrived faster than the governance to match it. The organizations that navigate it move their governance upstream, into boundaries, into the loop, into accountability assigned before deployment, instead of waiting to review decisions that have already been made and already had their consequences. Include builds that. Full field note on Substack. The operating system arc continues.